occurring outside your window. Thank you, Rabbi Bonnie. And I'm hoping my dog will be snoozing throughout the entire webinar here. So, right, exactly. So welcome everyone to our statewide webinar called Governing in the Absence of Compassion. I am Rhonda Lidner, the Education Director of Tikkun Ha'ir and the Interfaith Organizer for WIVIC. This webinar is co-sponsored by Tikkun Ha'ir, WIVIC, Micah, and Congregation Shir Hadash. You'll hear about these organizations in just a moment. Today's webinar will be a conversation between Rabbi Michal Wohl of Shir Hadash and Reverend Richard Shaw of St. Matthew's CME Church and Micah. We will have time for questions, so please put them in the chat. We'll also have a call to action at the end of our meeting, so please don't leave early. Since this is a large group, please put yourselves on mute so our webinar can be as smooth as possible. Thank you so much. And with that brief introduction, we'll get ready. We'll get started. First, I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of Tikkun Ha'ir, Sammy Stein-Avner, my director, my good friend, and have her give us a brief explanation of Tikkun Ha'ir.
Rhonda. Hi, everybody. I am Sammy Stein-Avner. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of Tikkun Ha'ir, as Rhonda shared. Tikkun Ha'ir translates to repair the city in Hebrew, and we are lucky to be in a partnership with WIVIC, jointly hiring Rhonda, and have Congregation Shir Hadash as a sponsor organization. Tikkun Ha'ir is Milwaukee's Jewish social justice and social action organization. We bring together a large swath of the community to pursue civic engagement, as well as what we talk about as study and action. And we are an organization that focuses in a few different buckets and really see ourselves in working in partnership in many different ways. We have an important focus on direct service and volunteerism, as well as food justice. And we also lead conversations about social justice issues from a Jewish perspective. And then we work in coalition on Get Out the Vote work and seeing about how we're continuing to evolve in the advocacy space. And so happy to also be in conversation with Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice on that note as well. We are delighted to be focusing in on this upcoming important election, which I know you'll be hearing more about soon for Supreme Court. And we also are excited for this opportunity to connect with Reverend Shaw. I just had a great suggestion from one of our long-term folks, Susan Ellman, who reminded me that Tikkun Ha'ir is closely connected to the Jewish concept of Tikkun Olam. So that first word, Tikkun, is the same. Tikkun meaning repair, and the concept of Tikkun Olam is a very well-known Jewish value that so many of our congregations really hold close, that is pursuing justice in repairing the world. And so our slice of it is here in Milwaukee. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Rhonda, and the rest of our speakers.
All right, thanks, Sammy. Next, I'd like to introduce Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, another director of mine and another good friend of mine as well from WIVIC.
Thank you, Rhonda. So I'm Rabbi Bonnie Margulis. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice. And in partnership with the Wisconsin Council of Churches, we run the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, for which Rhonda is our statewide organizer. The Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign, or sometimes you'll hear us call it WIVIC, or you'll see the acronym WIVIC, has been around for this. We're going into our 4th year, and we focus on organizing clergy and congregations of all different faiths around the state for voter education, voter engagement, voter registration, and get out the vote activities. We also engage in advocacy for voting rights and against voter suppression. and for fair maps. We have all different kinds of volunteer opportunities for canvassing, for poll workers, for poll watchers, for poll chaplains, for people to do phone banking, to write postcards targeted to low voter turnout neighborhoods, all kinds of ways that you can get involved in our work. Rhonda puts together a fabulous weekly e-news that comes out at the beginning of every week, where we share news updates and action alerts and announcements of upcoming events, both Wisconsin Faith Voter Engagement Campaign news and events and action alerts, and also those of our many different partner organizations, which include organizations like Souls to the Polls, League of Women Voters, the ACLU, Disability Rights Wisconsin, Conservation Voters, just a long list. Some of you who are on the call today are among some of our amazing partner organizations, and we value all of your partnership so much. And all of you are individual advocates and activists and volunteers to help us promote voting rights and get out the vote in Wisconsin. And we'll say more at the end about our upcoming election next Tuesday and the importance of getting out the vote for that. But I'm going to turn it over back to Rhonda now to introduce our speakers.
All right, thank you, Rabbi Bonnie. So yes, we have two speakers, Pastor Richard Shaw and Rabbi Michal Wohl. Pastor Richard Shaw is the pastor of the historical St. Matthew CME Church in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where he has served since 2010. He is a pastor, preacher, teacher, and social justice advocate. His parish ministry journey began in Alabama, where he was born and raised. The church then called him to the Midwest in 2003, where he has served in Chicago and now Milwaukee. Pastor Shaw is also the president of MICA, the Milwaukee Inner City Congregation Allied for Hope. His congregation has been a part of MICA since 2012. Dr. Shaw earned his Master of Divinity degree from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary in Evanston and earned the Doctor of Ministry degree from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary through the Association of Chicago Theological Seminaries. His doctoral work focused on inspiring the Black middle class in terms of income congregation to engage its marginalized community. Pastor Shaw is married to Dr. Tony Shaw. They have 3 adult children and 4 grandchildren. So busy man with that big family. Rabbi Michal Wohl is Rabbi of Congregation Shir Hadash and the co-director of the Lux Center for Catholic Jewish Studies at the Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology. Congregation Shir Hadash is a sponsoring organization of MICA and Tikkun Ha'ir, as well as of HIAS, as well as of a HIAS Welcome Circle for Afghan refugees. Rabbi Wohl is also involved locally with the Interfaith Coalition of Greater Milwaukee and affiliated with Teruah, Rabbis for Human Rights, J Street, Seeking Peace and Justice in Israel/Palestine, and Never Again, Immigrant Action. And Rabbi Michal was one of the first rabbis I met when I joined the Jewish community here in 2020. So thank you both for coming on, and thank you everyone for your participation today. I'd like to give Rabbi Michal and Pastor Shaw a few minutes to introduce themselves a little bit and to introduce this topic, which has really sparked a lot of interest in all of us, which is governing in the absence of compassion and perhaps how we can flip that. So Rabbi Michal, would you like to get started?
Oh, sure. I sort of assumed I was going second. I feel like this was Reverend Dr. Shaw's chiddush. I'm going to use that word again, like his new idea. But I love, no, I'm good.
Okay.
And I realize unfortunately, we know what governing in the absence of compassion looks like. I think we're living it in way too many parts of our world and in our lives. And what I really wanted to bring was the reminder of why, as people of faith, compassion has to be at the core of our society. And I'm gonna nerd out a little bit and bring a little bit of Judaism to all of you. So thank you for letting me do this. And I'm glad we have a lot of time for exploration because there's so many directions we could take this in. So I'm going to take a step way back in time to look at a heritage that many of us share with the centrality of Hebrew scriptures, Old Testament, to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic communities, as well as to the founding communities and sort of systems of thinking of the Western world. In Jewish tradition, it's always good to start any inquiry with the Torah portion of the week. We read through the first 5 books of Moses every year in a very regular pattern. And behold, we are in the perfect spot to start a conversation about the importance of compassion in our government and society. We are in the middle of the book of Exodus. We've just left the narrative of the ancestral generations in Genesis, the enslavement and the exodus from Egypt of the Israelites. We've just had revelation of the first 10 utterances or 10 commandments, and are continuing to receive the holy mitzvot, the holy commandments. I often teach that the Israelites were brought out of slavery not to be free, but to have the opportunity to follow the regulations of God, rather than be required to fulfill the whims of the Pharaoh. In addition to many of the ritual and religious laws, many of which are not even relevant to contemporary Jewish life, there are hundreds of mitzvot bein adam lechavero, commandments between one human being and another, commandments designed to create a just society and a loving community. This, I believe, is the true chidush, that word again, the new idea of the Hebrew scripture. The shift from a focus on satisfying the needs of a God in exchange for protection to the establishment of norms between people and of systems to help clarify and maintain that just system. I suppose you will find that balance also in the famous choice made by Jesus of the 2 most important commandments. Love your God with all your heart, your soul, and your strength, found in Deuteronomy, and love your neighbor as yourself, from a section of Leviticus known as the Holiness Code. Those of you who are avid readers of the books of Moses might object that a lot of the law code seems rather punitive or perhaps primitive. And given its age, I believe that is a fair assessment, which is why both Judaism and Christianity found new interpretations of many of these laws. For example, in the Talmud, the rabbis many centuries ago made capital punishment nearly impossible, including that of the wayward child, because teenagers. The centrality of compassion is reflected in the second of these statements. Love your neighbor as yourself. When we see ourselves in our neighbor, we cannot help but to treat them in a just and a kind manner. Of course, the problem that we encounter and that we are encountering today is, who is our neighbor? Who counts as in the circle? Who is in the community? Who do we call ours? If we zoom out from this moment, we can find the answer to this question. The first chapter of Genesis, we learned that Adam, the first human, representing all of humanity, referred to in both the singular and in the plural, is created B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. The best description of God is found in Exodus chapter 34. As Moses sits in the cleft of the rock, watching the divine essence pass him by, a voice calls out God's unpronounceable name, and then El Rachum V'Chanun, God of compassion and of graciousness. Indeed, Rahmana, compassion, is one of God's many names in Jewish tradition and is foundational in Islamic thought as well. Judaism's focus on serving God rather than worshiping God and serving one another has led to centuries of Jewish thought on what that looks like. And we learn Just as the liturgy says, God heals the sick and frees the captive and lifts up the oppressed and clothes the naked, we too must heal the sick, free the captive, lift up the oppressed, and clothe the naked. This list is clearly given as an example, as examples, and not meant to be exhaustive. And even the list of mitzvot that we learn are limitless and of most value in this world contains many serving the other: to visit the sick, to bury the dead, to celebrate with the bride, to leave the corners of the field unharvested so that the hungry may come and eat. Of the more ritual mitzvot, we find only two: bringing our first fruits, sharing the best of what we have for the benefit of the whole, and studying the Torah, because the study of Torah is equal to all of them and leads to all of them. These traditions are joined by clear guidance on economic justice, there shall be no needy, as well as an unambivalent preference for restorative justice practices, forgiveness, and return to the community for all of those who err along the way. And in all of this, we know that the question is, who is that other who is deserving of all of this attention and compassion? And now that we live in a world where all mixed together, where we don't create our own separate established communities, as a Jewish person of faith, I believe that these same practices of compassion have to be encoded in the systems that I live within here in the secular world, as well as in my religious world. And that it's my obligation to help to create that.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was lovely. Thank you. All right, Pastor Shaw.
Yes, thank you, man. Hello to everyone, and thank you all for allowing me to be here today. And thank you, Rabbi Mihail, for leading off. I do understand that this theme came out of a conversation that took place where kind of considering how we got to where we are. And the statement that I made that was that some of the conditions that we face, we face them because we've come to a place now that we're governing in the absence of compassion. And to better understand the thought process in governing in the absence of compassion, we have to look at what it means to govern with compassion. And compassion, from the Latin, come, suffer with me, come share my experience with me. And from the Christian perspective, Matthew 25, when Jesus gives a parable, and I'll just share this parable, I won't spend a lot of time on it, but it says, "For when I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was a stranger, you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me." And it goes on to say, "Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we give you a stranger? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needed clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" And then verse 40 says, "The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." And I think one of the challenges that we have within the Christian community, and maybe other faiths as well, is our understanding of what it means to be righteous. We focus a great deal on personal piety and how we live our personal lives and personal choices that we make, and it causes us to overlook or deny human suffering. It seems like in this country, we're more concerned about what people do in their personal lives rather than how we treat one another, how we see one another. And I especially brought this text forth because here in this country, we see a lot of giving moments, giving seasons, where we give during the holiday, whichever holidays you celebrate, whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas for Christians. But then after that, some of the same people who give gifts, who bring turkeys and hams to the neighborhoods, will go and then legislate against things that could truly help poor communities. And so it is that understanding of righteousness that keeps us from being able to govern in a way where compassion is put first. And to govern with compassion, we have to look beyond our self-interest. We have to look beyond the interests of the wealthy, the rich, and to see those who are on the margins of life. Because these are the ones who don't have the platforms all the time to speak and share. So we have to look beyond our self-interest. We have to look beyond our communities. And I love how you brought in who is our neighbor, because we have to see further than those in our immediate circle. But not only see them, we have to hear them. Not only hear them, but we have to be intentional about listening to what they are saying. I've been in the ministry for a couple decades now. And one of the things that I pride myself in is trying to continually develop and grow. And so I had to self-reflect one day. And so for the last 6 months, I've been devoting myself to developing better listening skills. Because as a pastor, I'm always ready to jump in and give my view. I'm always ready because I got it with my presuppositions. I'm just ready to tell it like it is. Thanks to my wife, she helped me to realize that I need to be a better listener. And so it starts with listening to those who live on the margins and not assuming that everyone is lazy and they just don't want to do, and assuming that people don't want to go to work. But we have to understand a few things, and then I'll wrap it up. We have to understand that although we share a culture, there are subcultures. We're from different cultures, and our cultures, our experience shapes us. It's how we see life. It's how we process things. And so when you have a person who is 3rd, 4th generation poverty, they're not going to see things the same way that someone will who has come up in the middle class or upper income class. Life looks differently. And sometimes it's not that they don't want. Sometimes it just may be that they don't know. Their options are few. So it is the responsibility of the faith community, in my opinion, to hold our elected officials accountable when they close their ears to the voices of those who stand on the margins. When I was doing my dissertation, one of the corrections that was made was that I said that as pastors, we have to lift our prophetic voice to be a voice for the voiceless. And he helped me to understand that they're not voiceless. Their voices are just being ignored. And so as a faith community, we have that responsibility to help those who are saying what they're saying to be heard by those who are ignoring them. We also have to understand the reality of poverty. Many individuals in this country did not start, and I'll speak particularly to the African-American, did not start with an economic base that other races did. You know, in slavery for centuries, released and pretty much told to figure it out. No land, no property given to build from. So whereas other cultures were able to create generational wealth, most African-Americans created generational poverty. And that's systematic. America never took time to heal from slavery, never took time. We just made a move and said, go and do. Those who were slave owners and never took time to heal themselves. Because I argue that we would never be able to get rid of racism until those who have this idea of superialism are healed from that disease. And so the third thing is to truly understand what systematic racism is. It is easy for someone who has not been on the other side of it to say, oh no, America is not systematically racist. It's easy to say that when you have not been on the side where you have experienced discrimination simply because of the color of your skin. What does it mean to be entitled? To be entitled does not mean that you never have trouble, but to be entitled means that you've never had trouble because of your race. You've never had trouble because of your skin color. You've never had to experience being denied jobs that you were qualified for, and your communities being looked at in a way where compassion, where they feel that there's no need for compassion. And so on that note, when we think about governing with compassion, again, we have to be intentional about listening and hearing the voices of those who are crying out, not just color, classism, sexual identity. These are things that we have to take time to hear and to understand. And so if we're ever going to get there, we can only get there, again, by listening to, quote, the other. And I don't like using that term because it's exclusive, but we have to come to a place to hear everyone. So I'll just stop there. I know we have to have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Rabbi Michal, is there something you want to add to that? I have a few questions, or is there a question you'd like to address? And we'll ask for questions in the chat as well.
Yes, there is so much. I've been taking some notes as I've been listening, and a couple of different questions came up for me, and also some places where I really wanted to, just I forget. I mean, even as a rabbi, I forget that so much of what we're talking about was people understood this 1,000 years ago, and then we forget, right? We remember things about humanity and the way our community should be and our society should work. And then the next generation forgets, or just as the Africans were brought into slavery, the Jewish communities were sent off and kicked out and had to start again, being othered in a new place.
Mm-hmm.
And so realizing how much that's also part of our story. But I for instance, we talk about how do we serve one another? And as you were talking about righteousness, and it's really important to know that in the Hebrew, the word for what we would call charity, which for you is equivalent to the giving the ham or the turkey, it's not about charity, it's about righteousness.
Mm-hmm.
So give people what they need to have everyone be able to be self-sufficient at some humane level is a matter of righteousness and justice. And Maimonides 1,000 years ago created a scale of righteousness, of tzedakah, which at the very bottom was important people with a lot of stuff giving a little bit to delivering the hams and the turkeys and thinking that they've done something. And at the top is anonymously helping someone create a life for themselves, because everyone deserves to create a life for themselves.
Mm-hmm. And
once upon a time, at least many in this country could start that. And it's horrifying to think of how even the systems that were in place for that always excluded the African-American community. So to know that this knowledge was there, this understanding was there, but was only offered to people who came back from war who were white. So that is, I just had to really share that and shudder at the realization of how actively there's both knowledge and forgetting because of who we want to include in our story.
Yes.
I'm going to stop there.
Okay. Yeah, well, on that note, when we talk about knowing, I do agree. We've always known, but we know, but then we only exercise what benefits us. It is the selfishness. And then I would also say greed that comes along with the economic system that we have in place. That in order for a few people to remain extremely wealthy, a large amount of people have to be poor, and that's just the way it is. But when we're talking about voting, and with this election coming up, we have to vet our candidates to make sure that we are looking at individuals who know the difference between equality and equity. Because equality doesn't benefit the person necessarily that's at the bottom. It only elevates them at different levels at the same time. But equity is making sure that each community gets what is needed to help them to be successful. There was a meme that was on one of the social media platforms that I love to refer to sometimes. There were three children looking over a fence to try to see a game where there was a board, the fence was boarded. And so each one of them had a stool that was the same height, but still the shortest one could not see. See, that's equality. But in order for the shorter one to see, the shorter one had to have a higher stool to be able to look over. And that's what we're asking for, and that's what we're fighting for, is equity, to make sure that those who did not have a fair shot, that they're able to get that fair shot. And I'll say this and then I'll shut up. When we think about, I hear these statements about, oh, everyone has an opportunity and the playing field is level. And I use this image at a presentation that I did for actually the staff at Pilgrim. And I said, when I look at a football field, you're right. 100 yards, the center 50 to both sides is equal. It's equal. I said, I cannot deny that. I said, but let's look at the teams. When you have one team that comes from a system where their dietary program is top notch, where their weights program is at the top, and you put them against a team where the nutrition is poor, the physical training is poor, that's when you begin to see that no matter how much you think the playing field is level, they're coming to that playing field from a different background. And so how then can we take the team that is getting the poor nutrition and weight program to bring them up to where the team who's getting the best, then let's put them together and see how it fans out.
So the kind of the cartoon, the graphic you described, I've seen it with a third box.
Yes.
So in the second box, so that each one has the right size box under them to lift their eyes over the fence. In the third box, they just take the fence down.
Yes. Yes.
They create a world that like everyone has some access to. And I don't know the right, I don't know how they described each box. I want to take a turn. This is something that you and I touched on a little bit when you and I talked individually.
Okay.
Because we're here as people of faith to talk about how we bring that faith into evaluating the needs of our government and our people and as voters. But no, the faith vote is often, that's not what people think of as the religious voter. And it's interesting, many of you may know that there's chaos in Israel right now due to recent change in government, and there's a new flourishing religious left, which is brand new. And so how do we as people of faith bring that and stand up to and talk to others who say that they are supporting certain ideas because of their faith. And it may be the same faith. Like what do we do with that idea of a faith voter, and bringing our faith to our government, our needs, not to our desires for government, desires for society, and have that conversation. And I will tell you, and I really appreciate this kind of intimate forum, as intimate as Zoom can be. My non-Jewish husband is often sort of pushing me to say, why aren't you talking to, why aren't you talking out more as a Jewish person, saying these are Jewish values, these are Jewish values, and having that conversation with others who will want to bring other Jewish values, and talk about that in public. I don't know if you have thoughts about that, or is it something that just is it and of course, all of this is relational, right? It goes back to like, how does someone not become the other, or someone you have a relationship with? So I'm just putting it out there, see what you have to say about it.
Well, yeah, I was actually kind of out there because when you said something that brought me back really to my sermon that I preached this past Sunday. And it was about wolves in sheep's clothing, and really looking at the motive. See, when we think about, and I speak to and through the lens of Christianity, that Christianity is broad. It can be interpreted in many different ways, so there's no one set understanding of what Christianity looks like. Sometimes I tell myself that, I ask myself, am I a Christian or am I a follower of Christ? Because when we get into talking about Christianity, it has, in my opinion, been hijacked by certain groups. So when we talk about voting and elected officials, and right here in this country, what we see, and I know I see it, so hopefully you all see it, this move of Christian nationalism that desires to control the narrative of what it means to be a Christian. And not only to control the narrative of what it means to be a Christian, but that this country become a Christian country based on their understanding of Christianity, or their perception or perspective. And sometimes I really don't believe that they believe that that's what Christianity should look like, but it serves their self-interest. And so when we talk about things that impacts us, and how we utilize our faith to speak, that can be tricky. That can be tricky because if I'm of the Christian thought that promotes dominance and control, I'm not necessarily concerned about your interests. I'm only concerned about mine. And if you do not conform to my interests, then you are not Christian. If you do not conform to my idea of what it means to be a Christian, then surely you're not a Christian. And I oftentimes say to my community, the African-American community, we have to be careful of that, because our understanding of Christianity is not the dominant understanding. So if we subscribe to it, then we're automatically kind of putting ourselves in the back seat. And it's so easy to get caught up in conversations that distracts us. And I hope I'm getting to what you were saying, that distracts us from the real issues that we have to face. And I shared, those of you who were with us, I think out in Brookfield, that the African-American church in particularly, we wrestle with our conversation over sexuality and abortion. There's no one size that fits all. There are those who are pro-life, there are those who are pro-choice, there are those who support gay marriages, there are those who don't. And sometimes that distracts us. Not saying that those issues are not important, but they distract us from seeing and realizing that there's an agenda that is being slipped in that is harmful, devastating to poor people and to minorities. And so we have to make sure that we are approaching politics through the lenses of a faith that goes back to what I shared earlier, that what we do to the least of these, we have also done unto Christ, if we say that we're followers of Christ. Now, one of the things that, Mihail, that I'll ask is, and I'm going to pull this from one of our questions that we have here. How do you see the roles of nation, state, and local governments in our daily lives?
So yeah, I'm so much in my faith, my head so much in our values right now.
Yeah.
You know, the whole idea of where, so last week, it's just so really, it's like I could just live in Torah of the moment and answer all these questions. So it's literally last week. And every Shabbat morning, we have about somewhere between a dozen and 20 people come together and wrestle with the Torah portion of the week. And you may remember that Moses's father-in-law comes to visit him soon after they've landed out in the desert, and watches Moses trying to talk to each person with a problem and go talk to God and solve their problem, and institutes an entire layer, many layers of government. The leaders of thousands and the leaders of hundreds and the leaders of 50s. And we sat and said, okay, so this is like our city, our county, our state, our national, like figuring out at what level we need systems to help individuals live out their lives. Ideally, that is the role, is to help us all live out our lives. And some of that is to keep us safe. Fires and some police, some aspects of the police, many aspects of fire and EMT. I'm looking out the window. No, I'm seeing snow plows and stoplights. You know, all of those things we need to keep us safe, and ways to keep us well. And we're talking about structure of the roles of government, and because I keep looking at these texts to understand like the vision of a system. And the system really suggests that not only is there some foundation above which everyone should be living, but it's all of our obligations to bring everyone up to that level. It says in just a few verses in Leviticus, there shall be no needy among you, but when you see someone needy, here is what you are going to do. And so as people's, the word's missing, as the situation rises and falls, we are continually there lifting up and lifting up. So, for some people, that is a question of, is that big government? Is that small government? I mean, it certainly isn't the pull yourself up by your bootstraps government. Like, there's a lot of people with no bootstraps. The slaves leaving Egypt had no boots, right? But the piece that we haven't touched on that feels really, really important, especially with the specific election coming up, is criminal justice.
Yes.
It's policing and criminal justice.
Yes.
And the punitive, that it is so beyond what our faiths, the world of where our faiths evolved even could think about. And those systems are so broken, and the idea of what, a judge who's going to then make rules for other judges to decide how that system in our very broken system in this very broken state, I mean, we have one of the worst in the country, feels so important. Like, are we worried about the rights of victims? Are we worried about the human rights of people who break laws and make mistakes? Is our goal to lift people back up into life, or is it to shut them away? And I know my tradition wants to bring forgiveness and understanding between people, and provide opportunities for the word in Hebrew, teshuva, of returning to start again.
Yes. And I think also with even from the Christian faith is that's what it's about. It's about building people back up through the love of Jesus. When I asked that question or brought it forth, my mind automatically went to, I think I spoke to the legislative part where there are laws that have been put in place that are not fair to certain groups, benefit some but not others. But when we talk about the judicial system, we cannot ignore the disparity in mass incarceration and how that has impacted the neighborhoods in most larger inner cities. Right there, and I'm not giving you any new reports. I think everybody by now knows that where St. Matthew, I call it our mother facility, 53206, that when that study came out from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and they had a map, and there were spots where there was someone where it showed where someone who had been incarcerated lived. Every block, there was at least one dot. And so can you imagine what this does to the family dynamic, first of all, because it pulls, in most cases, the father from the house. Now, I'm not one who says that people who have not committed crime should not face some type of consequences, but I also would hope with those consequences, there are programs for rehabilitation, and it's not just to punish. But studies also show that African Americans were being given longer sentences than other groups for the same crimes. And so situations where a person could have probably gone through some type of a program, because I'm up for programs above prisons. That's me. I prefer programs above prisons. I know we have to have them, but there are those that truly could have been rehabilitated, allowed to get back out, to have a second chance at life so that they could be there for their children. And so that's how I see on all levels how government has impacted the poor communities. And again, because they're not governing with compassion, to say that, yes, this person may have committed this particular crime, but the goal should be, let's get them through what we need to get them through so that when they return, they're much better, or they have at least been restored or rehabilitated so that they can return to society as productive citizens. But when you take a person who may have had a minor incident in their lives and you put them in a system that is violent in and of itself, that's going to most likely impact that person in a way that they're going to become a repeat offender when they're released. And so that's what it's about, trying to get rid of that those returning, that recidivism going back into the system. And so that's where I see the government on each level can do a better job when it comes to mass incarceration.
We've touched on white Christian nationalism so much, and I know many of us were part of the programs last week, co-sponsored by a lot of the same organizations. And actually, if Rhonda, you could Bonnie, someone could remind me of the name of the wonderful presenter. I was actually able to go to 2 of her sessions.
It was Reverend Jennifer Butler from Faith in
Jennifer
Public
Butler,
Life.
thank
Yes.
you. Thank you.
And I can put the links in the chat if I can find them quickly to the recordings from Monday night and Tuesday night.
The moment that really spoke to me, that really sort of shocked me, and this goes back to perhaps my query of Richard about the different approaches of using faith in approaching, our government, was when she mentioned that the change was when Constantine made Christianity the religion of an empire.
Yes.
So something that was a personal faith and a guide for your life became an expectation, a label, a required set of beliefs. I mean, just it changes what the role religion played in the world. And that was such a powerful moment. And I believe that was in the clergy morning session on Tuesday. So I think that certainly speaks to the idea of the argument about whether or not this is a Christian, once it's a Christian nation, that then puts a whole different layer of definition versus, Jennifer really described her understanding of Christianity as I did, of freeing the captive and lifting people up and lifting ourselves up. And that was the most very powerful. So interesting, like we want faith and our faith values in our government, but not our faith expectations or our, I can't think of the other word, the identity, right? We want the values without that sharp, edgy thing that just is called identity. Of which then carries in all the other identities. And we know, especially in the 21st century, all of us have so many identities. Like the world is so much more complex than the instruments that we're used to working with can even, understand.
Yes. And, being that you mentioned about that I've come to set the captives free, I think one of the challenges that Christianity will have to deal with in terms of fully understanding the mission that we believe God has called us is to make a better connection with the mission. I believe that it was the mission, Jesus's mission, because he said, I have been anointed to preach the gospel, to set the captives free, to give sight to the blind. To me, he was speaking his mission. And we have to do a better job of connecting that with what the church has embraced as the Great Commission from Matthew 25. Go ye therefore into all of the world, baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Because when you get to that, now you're talking about assimilation, because we miss it. We miss what Jesus's mission was. And we focus on how we interpret the mission that Jesus gave to us. And so what we are more concerned with is assimilating people to make them like us versus making them like Christ. And I know that I may have those within the Christian faith to disagree with me on that, but how can I say that I'm doing the work of Christ when I'm not concerned about liberating those who are living in captivity in whichever fashion it is? Those who are being excluded, those who are being overlooked, the invisible. And am I more concerned about making you a member of my congregation than I am about seeing your life transformed and you're able to become liberated? Because that's the mission that I hold to. It's the one that Jesus said that I have been anointed to preach the gospel, the good news, and the good news, amen, and to set the captives free. So I just thought I would put that in there. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was one other question, and I don't know how much more time we have, but how can our faith text provide strength to those resisting social injustice? How can our text for us, for Christians, that would be the Bible as a whole? I think for your tradition, that would be the Torah. And please forgive me if I'm wrong on that, but so I'll just speak to it since I raised that. I think it goes back to what I was saying, that the Bible, when we look at it as a whole, you have an option. And I like to make this comparison because a lot of our fire, hell, and brimstone sermons came out of the interpretation of the book of Revelations, where we presented Jesus more as a roaring lion than a slain lamb. And that roaring lion gave people permission to be judgmental, to cast down, to beat down with scripture. Versus if we look at Jesus, the slain lamb, through the love and the sacrifice that he gave, then I think the church, the Christian community, would be much more effective if we just lived out the love that Jesus taught us. And if there's judgment, let that be in the hands of the Creator. Our job is just to love one another.
Amen.
Amen.
I just had a quick question maybe, and then we can have our call to action at 1 o'clock. And of course, any questions we can put in the chat. I could always send those questions to Pastor Shaw and Rabbi Michal later on. But I would just ask, as we move towards this very important February 21st election, how can we as faith, I love that word, faith voters, of all religions, any religions, how can we help our government to lead with compassion? What can we do from this Zoom on? I mean, I have our call to action, but wondering if
Yeah,
there was something that you had.
I really think teach more and live more. Because at the end of the day, it's the heart of a person that has to change. It's the heart of a person that has to change. And so when I try to think about what we can do, and I think the one thing that all faiths can do is lift up that part of your faith that teaches and preaches and shares love for humanity, that we see each other as human beings before we see color, before we see sex or anything else. And I know the reality is that we know that there are different shades. God, that's the beauty of God's creation. But can we see each other as humans first?
Well, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you both, Reverend Shaw and Rabbi Michal. I know that when we spoke last week, you raised a lot of questions and a lot of thought, and has driven some of the work that I've been doing the past couple of weeks. So I want to thank you for your inspiration. I want to thank everyone so much who've taken time out of your day to come to this webinar. All of us at our sponsor organizations, we know that everyone here is indeed a person of compassion and action. We know that you are people who believe that intention means nothing until we put it to action. So I know that this call to action can be really important. In a moment, I'm going to put up this call to action in the chat. It's going to be a link to a Google Doc that asks you to create what's called voter texting trees. It's a text that we ask that you can send to 5 people, 10 people. Some people have sent it to 20. Look on your cell phone for people who you think would want to receive a message like this. And it asks them to, it talks about the February 21st nonpartisan primary and what it means for all of us here in Wisconsin. So please only send it to your Wisconsin friends. What this means to all of us and our collective pursuit of democracy, reproductive rights, fair maps, and having a voice in how we are governed, and having a voice to demand of our legislators to act with compassion for all, and to hear the voices of everyone who is asking to be heard, and maybe those who may need a little bit of help from us to encourage them to let their voices be heard. I'm going to put that link in the chat right now. I promise you it's a pretty short text, and you can copy and paste it right into your cell phones. We already have over 100 people who've been contacted since in just under 24 hours. So I want to thank any of our friends or partners who have already sent these voter texting trees. I appreciate it. Thank you again for your words of wisdom and inspiration, Reverend Shaw and Rabbi Michal. I personally enjoy so much working with both of you, and I feel very grateful to be part of your community. So thank you.
Same here. Thank you. It's an honor being here.
Right. Well, thank you.
It's been a pleasure, and what a great opportunity to get to know Reverend Dr. Shaw.
Same here. Wonderful. And enjoyed our first time meeting as well. Thank you.
And we can send a recording of this and different links as soon as the recording is ready. And I will most likely send this voter texting tree out to everyone as well, probably tonight. So thank you so much. Bonnie, do you want to send us off with some words of farewell?
Yeah, thank you all so much. Thank you to Rabbi Wool and Pastor Shaw for being our incredibly passionate and inspiring speakers today. I think it's been a really rich and wonderful conversation, and really appreciate your sharing your words of wisdom and insight with us. And thank you also to Rhonda for organizing this, and for all the hard work that Rhonda does every day for the Wisconsin Interfaith Voter Engagement Campaign and Tikkun Ha'ir. She's been an amazing gift to us, and we really love her and appreciate all that she does. I just want to send you off with a final word or couple of words. My word is vote, and my couple of words is bring friends with you to go vote. So we will see you at the polls on Tuesday, or vote early. There's still another day or two left of early voting. So thank you all, and have a wonderful rest of your snowy day.
Thank you so much, everyone.